Our speaker today is Marcia Rhode. She is a leadership coach. Can't we all use that? The topic is going to be called Coaching Skills for Job Seekers. She is a leadership coach dedicated to helping leaders navigate and drive positive change in themselves and their organizations. As a thought partner, she brings an extensive background working with tech, business, and nonprofit leaders to develop workable strategies during constant change. Marcia holds a BA in psychology from UT Austin and an MA in organizational development from Fielding Graduate University. She is an ICF accredited coach, that's the International Coach Foundation, and has served on the board of directors for the ICF Austin chapter. Let's give a warm Launchpad welcome to Marcia Rhode.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you all, sort of, and to be here today. I'm looking forward to sharing my presentation with you and seeing kind of what might resonate with you. And as I think it's Catherine, I don't have you in front of me now, had said that you know my background as an evidence-based coach for the ICF training, organizational development consultant. And anyway, I thank you for coming today to give me an opportunity to talk about something that is really a passion for me. So what I was going to say is kind of how did I come to this point? And in this slide, I kind of look at it as I wish I knew then what I know now. Prior to being an IT professional, I was a psych major and working in various things with the public. I was a daycare center director, but somehow my psych background, as well as a communication minor, led me into technology. And I'm kind of an oddball in some ways because I never coded. I don't have a computer science degree, but I got work as a systems analyst. Systems analyst is where I started out. And then I progressed into doing more and more complicated or more complex project development. I ended up as a consultant to Fortune 500 companies, mostly to do data integration projects and systems and enterprise architecture plan. And so along my way, I learned that most projects fail. And it might be told, we might call it a success, but those who are in the development of it know all these little glitches and the chewing gum and string that kind of made that quote a success. And that really troubled me. And one thing I realized is there was just so much interpersonal miscommunication and lack of understanding of how we need to work together in order to get things done. So anyway, the blame for all of these projects tended to be poor communication. So that's what led me into coaching. And I didn't really think I was going into coaching. I had been consulting for over 15 years and was ready to kind of stop and get off the road. And I chose to go back and get my master's in organizational management and development for the purpose of being a better consultant, being more in a role of being able to facilitate miscommunications and project communications. But while I was getting my master's, I discovered coaching. And I never thought that was something I would be interested in. But when I went through the program, I learned it was exactly what I was looking for. Because coaching skills are at their very fundamental level, they are communication skills. And that is why I call this presentation Coaching Skills for Job Professionals, because I'm going to draw on some of the things I've learned through my coach training that I think are really relate to communication. And as job seekers, you want to make sure that you are communicating effectively and productively, and that you're leaving a good impression. So that's kind of the direction and the purpose of this presentation. I'd also like to add that I created this presentation prior to the pandemic. And so as I was getting ready for this meeting, I realized that so many things have changed since the pandemic. We're now not so much in person, we are virtual. And it's not like we were never virtual before, but now we're really all the time virtual. And sometimes we're even hybrid virtual, where we have some people in the room with us and some people that are on Zoom, for example. This complicates how we communicate. So my point about coaching and how I think it makes sense to talk about this is coaching is the official definition of coaching from the International Coaching Federation, which is the credentialing organization for coaches. They are worldwide. It's a huge number of coaches that they run through. I wouldn't say run through, but they require a certain level of training from certain kinds of coaching schools. Anyway, coaching is a partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires to maximize personal and professional potential. And so while I'm not suggesting that you need to all be coaches, but there are these skills that help you get to that thought-provoking discussion, that help enrich and improve how we are communicating and how we are sharing our information. And this one I like, coaching facilitates self-directed neuroplasty, which means that our brains can change. When we learn new behaviors, it does change our brains and it becomes more natural. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what our milieu is. What are we facing in our workplace today? And then I'm going to talk about what I call meta skills for the 21st century. And these are trust and accountability, awareness, active listening, relevant and reflective questions. And these four together, I think they interrelate. Active listening and relevant questions is kind of what we call direct communication. I'm going to break these down just to kind of give you an idea of these different components and how they might be able to help you. Okay, I'm not going to touch anything. Nope. Okay, so first I want to talk about awareness and trust. And trustworthiness is so important in terms of getting people to respect you, to getting them to think that you know what you're doing, to get them to see that they can rely on you. And so that's an intangible thing in so many ways. And along with that, along with the trustworthiness, to be trustworthy, you have to have a certain level of awareness, self-awareness. And we're going to be talking about both of those here. Building trust. So what is that? How do we build trust? We build it by being present and paying attention. And this is so much more important now. I mean, it is always really important, but especially when we're on a Zoom call or in a virtual call, because we can miss so much that we are not getting by being in the room and picking up on the body language. We need to be able, when we build trust, we ask for and we give feedback. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that when we talk about direct communication. But that's one of the best ways that people know that you are listening to them. You deliver on commitments. I think that's kind of obvious. You do what you say you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And if not, you communicate, oh, I've got a delay in this deadline, and here's what I'm going to do about it. So it's really how do people trust you? How does your boss trust you? It's these kinds of things. They want you to be consistent. You show up every day and be a consistent person so they know who they're dealing with. And one of my favorites is showing kindness and empathy. And another word in the coaching world is unconditional positive regard. We treat everyone in a kind way. We try to show empathy because that, again, will build trust with the person that you're working with. And that goes along with authenticity. Don't try to be somebody else. So a little bit about self-awareness, which is really important so you can trust yourself as well as others. And there's really two definitions of self-awareness that are becoming, that have kind of come out in the last several years. some definitions. And I really like this separation because there are two. One is how we see ourselves, how we, our internal dialogue, what we think we are. And the other one is how do other people see how we are? So where I might see myself as I'm conscientious and I always get my work done on time, and I know my area, and yet I might be perceived by the people I'm working with as a know-it-all. And so it's just being aware of not only how you feel about something, about your own personal self-awareness, but how that impacts other people around you. And I cited the book that, the article, I think, well, actually, it's a new book coming out. I got this from an article about it. It's called Insight, the Surprising Truth About How Others See Us and How We See Ourselves and Why That Matters More Than We Think. And it's an excellent book. So anyway, these are some of the thoughts that Tasha and in her research developed these two self-awareness definitions. And something, that kind of a storied way to think about this is and let's go back to like when we were in person. So this example works, but you can walk into somebody's office for a meeting and they're sitting way back in their chair. And that is a way that body language says, who are you and what do you want? But it really could be the guy's got a back problem. And when he leans back in his chair, he's more comfortable. So it's all these things we have to kind of be aware of. And again, when I say unconditional positive regard, to understand that how it might look to you may not be what the problem or what the situation really is. So why would you care about self-awareness? Well, I call it embarrassment insurance. So I don't put my foot in it. So I'm not, making comments that really are inappropriate because I'm understanding where I am and who I'm talking to. And that goes to understanding other people's mindsets. When you're self-aware, you have a much better way of understanding how other people might be viewing you and viewing the situation that might be different from you. Of course, it improves your relationships. And the research says that self-awareness is fundamental and has a more positive impact on leadership, on successful leadership, than having an MBA. Because that self-awareness is about caring about people and about connecting, not just as a touchy-feely, but being, recognizing that we're all different and we all have our own thoughts and feelings. And so being aware of that helps a leader become much more effective. Teams that have high self-awareness and make better decisions, interact with each other better, and tensions are reduced. And kind of going back to my story about project developments, we often know that the project isn't what we thought it would be. It didn't turn out like we thought it would be. There's usually a lot of tension around that. And so having more understanding of what happened and your role in it and the role of others is really important to making it better the next time. So talking about communication building blocks. We've talked a little bit about trust and awareness, and they're going to weave through the rest of the presentation as well. The next thing I'd like to talk about is active listening. We think we know, and often we do, but it's really about are you hearing what you thought you heard? Is the message you sent being received? Oh, this is one of my cartoons. I'm not sure exactly this, I put it in the right spot, but it says it's Dilbert. He's lying on the sofa with the therapist and he says, I multitask during conference calls. Is it wrong to value my productivity over the inane babbling of others? And the therapist is saying, buy pickles, bread, light bulbs. And so that's what happens when we're not paying attention we're not listening. Okay. So we have 4 levels of listening. This is a little bit academic here, but I think it can be helpful to help us understand how we listen. The first one is called downloading. And this is where you are listening for information that affects you. It's about, how does that impact me? What do I need to do? And that's very different from what we call fact-based. So that when, in this case, you are, it's more of a debate, and you're really talking about something else. You're talking about the project, and you are having maybe a debate, or maybe there's a competition about who's right and who's wrong about that situation. Then there's the empathetic. You are asking people what they think and feel from what you've heard. And you are operating in that sense from focusing on the other person. Your communication then is not about how you think about it, but about how they are. Now, generative is the place we really want to be, especially in projects where we are not in our me world. We're not thinking about the it world. We're thinking about our world. How can we together make this work? So let me see. Put it here. Let me see if I want to go back here. Sorry, I went back on the slide or two because I don't think I made enough of this. In light of what I've said, the picture you see on the right is from a book called The Third Alternative by Stephen R. Covey. And that diagram is meant to convey what I want to call healthy discussion and coming to conclusions together. And that means you can't be ego-driven. That means you have your own point of view, others have their own point of view. We come together to think, how can we, how do we work our differences out without making one person wrong and the other person right? And that is synergy. And so having more awareness and building that trust with that person will give you a much better foundation for having true communication. And good communication means good project outcomes. So sorry about going back there. Like I said, so much of this stuff is interwoven. And then I just wanted to note also on the 4 levels of listening, that comes from Otto Schwarmer, the Theory U. There's quite a bit of websites out there about this concept. So elements of understanding and how to listen. And I don't know that I covered this before, but this diagram, the what I think, what I can put into words, the what I think is the totality of everything you're thinking when somebody's speaking to you. You've got a lot going on in your mind. There's lots of thought happening. And then you're thinking, okay, of everything I'm thinking, what is it I can put into words? Because as we know, we think in images often. So what is it I want to say? And then there's actually what you do say. And then it's what people really heard. So the question is, did they hear what you meant them to say? I mean, did they hear what you said? Did they, I think, what you meant what was heard? And for the most part, it usually isn't. People are hearing part of it. And so one of the ways you help with this is your own careful observation about what you are hearing. And I'll talk a little bit more in a while about how we do that when we're virtual. But in general, we listen by listening, but then asking questions, maybe reframing what they said to let them know that you understood it or to drive out any misunderstandings. And that relevant feedback is really important because it tells that person that you were really listening. So how do you know someone is listening? And how do you know you're listening? When you're fully present and you react full time, real time, sorry, eye contact. And now eye contact is different now. It's all different in terms of these kinds of things where we don't have our body language to give us cues anymore. So eye contact in our virtual environment is replaced by how our written communication, how we express someone that we hear what they're saying. And again, I'll talk about that just a little bit further. And the person shows empathy. When somebody's really listening, they're hearing, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Or, there's a story about a woman going to her boss to say, Mr. Boss, I've got cancer treatments. I can't come in next Wednesday. And the boss says, well, what am I going to do about that? Do you think she felt listened to? Doesn't help. So the lack of empathy is, in that case, would alienate this person. And in fact, it did. She didn't want to go back to work there. So not so much, how do you know someone is listening? Well, they're always checking their phone or their email while you're talking with them. Their body language is disengaged. And that is more difficult to notice online, but it is obvious when somebody's not paying attention. You get rote or minimal replies. Oh yeah, sure, I get it. Yeah, you don't need to tell me anymore, or whatever that is. But those are all things that shut people down. And the multitasking, which is the slide I showed you before, you can't pay attention to what someone is saying if you're doing something else. Now, if you're just downloading information, and that might be one thing, but if you're really trying to engage and come to some kind of meeting of the minds, you can't be multitasking. I wanted to make a point earlier. I don't know that I did, but I'm just going to talk about it now, about the importance of the okay, I'm going to do something really I probably shouldn't do, but I think in all my hassle with getting started, I missed a couple of slides that I think are really important. So hold on, let me go back. I'm going to talk about it. Yes, the workplace challenges that we're facing. And these are always the case. We have multicultural and geographically dispersed teams. They often, not only is it the time differences, but there's the cultural differences that can really impact how we communicate. For example, in some cultures, looking people in the eye is impolite. In other cultures, and one of my examples is one of the developers that was working for me on a project was from another country. And she was really new to the US and incredibly talented. And so I'd given her an assignment that I thought was pretty clear. It was well written. It was basically a spec of, here, take this piece of data and move it over there. So I gave it to her. We reviewed it. I made it clear that she can come to me anytime if she had any questions. And then I didn't hear from her for a few days. And so I thought, well, that's odd. How could she not have questions? Maybe she's on a different assignment. Then I go by her office or her desk, and I ask her about it, and she says, oh, she had it done. And I looked at what she had done, and it was totally wrong. And what I realized after the fact is that I was in a position of authority. She, in her culture, viewed that as, you don't ask questions, you just say yes. And so that, I look back now, and I would have been more proactive knowing that. So being aware of the kind of people you're dealing with and then from the culture they come from can help you understand better their communication style. We also have relationships that are going across horizontal and vertical and hybrid and all kinds of different structures that can make it really confusing to figure out where we are and how best to communicate with whom. We have a lot of change and ambiguity. And again, that's always kind of been the case, but now it's on steroids with our having to be mostly virtual and everybody working from home. And it's really changed things. We have different expectations for communications, and this is a bigger discussion about gender differences, coming from cultural differences. Some people expect short and quick emails, others want kind of more formal. So those are always things we have to kind of worry with or adjust to and adapt to in a new environment. And trust and teamwork, which all of these things we've been talking about are what help build trust and teamwork. And then the new workplace challenges, I call them, which are all the other ones. Plus now we have the pandemic that has forced, I believe we are now under, it's a cultural trauma that we're experiencing. It's forced changes in how we live and communicate. It's not the same anymore. So those things are traumatic and have contributed to a high level of misunderstanding due to confusing virtual cues, confusing virtual communication. And the estimate that they've made on this is people doing the study, and I have them at the end, they figured out that every worker is spending 2 hours a week, 4 hours a week, on wasted or miscommunication or lack of understanding. So virtual communication channels are causing us to lose work. It's a waste of time when you have, when you're not hearing, you're not reading, and that again comes from this high level of misunderstanding due to confusing communication. It goes back to what do we say, and how do we say it in our email? Are we asking for what we want? Are we clear when we tell people? Are our words clear? And we all have collective and personal societal anxiety, which permeates everything. And these lack of interpersonal connections make us feel less trustful of others, less sure of the relationship. So those were just some of the things I wanted to point out about how things have changed in how we communicate and the expectations. So our old ways of communicating and reading body language are gone. So the new body language is really about written body language, or we show our empathy and our understanding through what we write and what we send out and what we get back. Go back. There we go. This one is another one I kind of breeze past. Again, it's kind of, we know what we think. We put into words what we think we're thinking. And then, as we know, sometimes what comes out of our mouth isn't exactly what we thought we could put into words. And then, of course, that's another level of confusion that can occur when somebody's trying to understand what you mean. And I've highlighted here, the miscommunication is like one of the number one reasons projects fail. 65% to 70% of communication is nonverbal. So now you think about today when we don't have so many options for nonverbal. We can sometimes see people's head nod, but in fact, we're all looking at cameras. We're not looking at each other. And that kind of is another level of feeling of isolation, of disconnection that we have to work on in how, when, what we say. Okay, now I'm gonna breeze forward here, I think. Talked about those. of this going back. So we talked about how do you know somebody's listening? And here, when I talked about eye contact, we know somebody's listening is when they read our emails and they answer it. They've read our emails carefully, or what information that you have sent, and you respond in kind. That's really the new kind of eye contact, body language. So I want to talk a little bit about email, text, and chat. And this isn't near what can be said about it. But in all cases, when you are communicating, unless you're in a chat with work people on a project that everybody knows, you know, the abbreviations and the project that you're working on. So an email, I'm going to talk mostly about email, is you open with empathy. It's not like, hi, we're doing a new project. Do you want to be on it? You know, it's hi, how are you? We're thinking you might be a really good person to be on our new project. You get to the point quickly. You've opened with empathy. Look at your emails when you write them as a website, because that's how people read it. So you don't want a lot of long paragraphs. You want to be able to clearly state what your questions are, what your priority is when you are asking. You know, so I need you, I want to know if you can be there at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and I need to know that today by 5 o'clock. So that's the kind of clarity you want to start putting in your emails so that people know that you heard them. There's nothing worse, and I'm a volunteer coordinator, about sending out, we've got a volunteer opportunity, and here's what it is, and here's the date, and here's when you need to volunteer. And invariably, I'll get some back. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward email, and I'll still get back, so when is it? And that just tells me they did not read my email. And that then tells me, well, they don't care what I'm saying. They don't respect enough what I'm trying to tell them. And so that, what does that do? It reduces your trust level in that person. And when you have that going on your team and you have that lack of trust building, then you're not going to have a successful project, because good projects require people collaborating and communicating. And it's hard to do when you're irritated or you feel like that person is disrespecting you. And maybe that person didn't mean to, they just maybe had poor email etiquette. So I kind of think again about always give people the benefit of the doubt. That's the big thing. You should use email if you have something that's longer than 5 sentences. It's too much on text. On an email, make sure your subject line is clear. You don't want to, like the guy who gets an email from his boss on a Friday saying, meet me in my office Monday, as the headline. And the guy knows that they're going through layoffs. So he spends the whole weekend scared to death. I'm going to get fired. But it wasn't about that at all. And so that had to do with the email subject line. It might have been better to say, I'd like to meet you to discuss XYZ. Can you come Monday? You know, that's the kind of way you need to think about it. Your email subject line is your headline for the topic that you want to discuss. Closing your emails. And sometimes, you know, this seems like, oh, kind of not that important, but it is really important to thank the person for their time, to maybe it's a compliment, like, you know, you've really done a great job for us in the past. Thank you again. I appreciate your attention to my email. Thank you in advance. These kind of things, again, help convey a lot of things you can't convey if you're not in person. And then I think we all kind of know this. We want to text or chat when we have informal communications, or we want something more immediate response. Email, the general rule now is expect something in 24 hours. So there's a book that is coming out, and some of this information I've gotten from it. And I like this phrase, brief does not mean lacking content. So you want to be brief, but you want to think about, how can I be concise and, so that when the person reads it, they're not reading through 4 paragraphs to get to what I really want. And the book is called, and I can't wait to have my own personal copy, is Digital Body Language. It's by Erica Dwan. And she did a book, a bestseller a few years ago called, now I got to think of what it's called, but it's about connectional intelligence and how that is so important in having a productive work team, and not only just productive, but productive in such a way, and I believe you can't be productive unless people can get along. That it's a community effort. We don't all have to agree. We have to focus on what the project is and give people a lot of latitude in understanding them. Goes back to the unconditional positive regard. Don't assume ill will. And it's hard not to when you read some of the emails that I've gotten. So here we go. Hey. So we've been talking about listening, direct communication, and I like this slide. It's called active listening, where you use open and closed questioning. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Showing interest, giving feedback, giving thoughtful feedback and questions. Probing. Observe nonverbal behavior, which in this case is a little bit different, but there are some things you can do. You can notice if somebody's, especially on a one-on-one Zoom call, it's a lot easier. So in large part, I'm talking about when you have more than one participant, where you need to, you can't look at everybody all the time. And you definitely want to avoid distractions and interruptions when you're trying to listen to somebody. It's hard to do when we're working from home and the kids come in, and that's, and now we accept that. But for the most part, we want to try to reduce that so that the person that we are talking with knows that we are listening. So we've talked about kind of basic communication building blocks. The last thing is to talk a little bit about questions. So we know about listening, and so now let's think about what we mean by relevant questions. Like, are they random? Are they to the point? What makes a relevant question? And another thing I really enjoyed, and I'm sharing this with you, is the importance of asking questions. And this came from a Harvard study that found that we are perceived as higher in responsiveness and interpersonal construct than that captures listening, understanding, validation, and care. And while I'm underlining the big point here is asking a question and then asking at least 2 follow-up questions dramatically increase how much someone likes you. And the simple reason is because you've shown them that you're listening to them. So it's not any old follow-up question, it's a relevant follow-up question. And that is the number one way, and that is something in coaching that we're not using it to get people to like you so much, but to get them to feel comfortable with opening up. And the way we do that is to let them know we hear them, and that we hear them, they know we hear them when we give them a response that's relevant to what they have said. And the purpose is the more, when you ask people questions, they're going to be sharing information about themselves. And most people want to share information about themselves. And that builds trust. Once they feel like you're listening to them and that you kind of know them and you kind of get them, they're going to be much more willing to trust you with things. Long way. Get my button straight here. So what's a good question? Well, it's neutral in your tone and your body language and your mood. It's not, what do you want? It's like, well, what can I do for you? There's just a difference in how you can phrase things. Open-ended. Not, well, it's like, what do you think about this? Rather than, do you think that or this? It's really, you want to be open-ended so you can encourage information coming to you. rephrasing. And that goes to that listening again, that feedback that said, I heard you say, is that correct? That tells the person that you listened, even if you got it kind of wrong, that you care enough to get it straight, that you care enough to give them your attention. And the generative type of question is totally open-ended that says, tell me more about whatever. And then they tell you what they tell you, and then you go into being curious and rephrasing. So those are what we consider to be really good questions. So tips for asking good questions. Well, avoid making assumptions. Don't assume, just by looking at someone, or don't assume what they meant if you really don't understand it. And even if you do think you understand it, take time to reframe it, ask those questions, make sure you've clarified what the person meant to say. And when you're asking a question, be concise. None of these long, 3-sentence questions, as we've seen some people can do. Stacked questions, such as, well, are you going out there today? And when you do, will you be coming back at 5? That's a stacked question. Which one do you want me to answer? There's also the one that says, do you want to meet on Thursday or Friday? The answer is yes. So a better way to put that is, could you meet Thursday or Friday? Let me know by the end of the day and we'll schedule. So that's what we mean about being concise. And that kind of, the stacked questions certainly aren't concise. So that is another good tip for how you want to ask questions. And asking closed questions, and that means yes or no answers. Did you like doing that? Rather than, how did that go? So again, you're asking sort of the same thing, but you're being more careful in your phrasing. You want to match your client's tone and language. And this can kind of get tricky because different people and different generations and different cultures are more formal. Others are less so. So in coaching, we have learned you match the person that you're talking with. If they are coming across as with a more formal tone, which says dear XYZ, and very, as opposed to hi, Jenna, then match that. You don't want to be the person who's sticking to some style that isn't going to really gel with the person that you're working with. Note language such as always and never, and this is the only way. Because truthfully, there's very little always and never. And those kind of words cut people off. So you can tone that down. And then why questions are useful if you're trying to dig out information for a certain thing. Like, well, why do they do it that way? That might help you understand kind of what you need to do with that. But more often than not, why questions just get us into philosophical answers. And depending on what you're trying to uncover and what you're trying to accomplish, that isn't going to help you. And again, these are like the general rules. They're not all absolute. And when you are speaking to people, when you're hearing them, listen for the metaphors that they use and try to match them. Before I go off of that, well, maybe I'll do it here. Communication guillotines, I like to call them, which is things you really don't want to say. So we might think, what a jerk. And then what we really mean to say and what we really need to consider it as is, I wonder what's going on with her. You might think it's being jerky, but maybe there's, maybe she just lost her husband, or, there are lots of reasons people can, I would call it be rude. Another question is, why does this always happen? Another way to ask that question is, this seems to happen a lot. What's going on? As you can see, that's a totally different tone. And you're still going to get to the same kind of answer you're looking for, hopefully a better one. You should. Don't we all hate that? you should. I mean, really? It's much better, it goes down a lot better if you say, what would it be like if you did that? And that, anytime anybody says, you should do this to me, my back goes up and say, well, who says? But if somebody says, well, what would it be like if you would do it that way? I'm like, well, I'll consider that. And so again, it gives your audience a much better impression of you and of your openness and your professionalism. Oh, and then why would you, which is kind of along there with why. It would be, how do you decide? Why would you do it that way? Well, maybe a better way to say it, more peaceful way to say it is, how did you decide to take that approach? And that opens up a whole different discussion. Maybe there's something that you have missed in what they have said or what they have done. And one of mine is, I guess it's a communication guillotine, but I had a situation when I had gotten a new job as a manager, an executive manager, and that was kind of a big, big leap for me. And I was sitting in my boss's office with some other people, and I was so nervous and I was so concerned about showing that I knew what I was doing and that I was part of them. And so I ended up alienating everybody. And at the end of and I didn't know that. I'm off in my own world, and I'm probably saying things like you should, or why'd you do that? And when everybody left the room, my boss turned to me, who I had a really good relationship with, and I still appreciate this comment. He said, at least try to pretend that you're listening. And that, and I know I'm talking about here with communication guillotines, but I'm thinking about, it is about listening and about the things that you say that tell people whether you're listening or not. In my mind, I was listening, but I was so busy thinking about other things that I was saying and doing things that alienated the group. So in the end, direct communication is connecting what you and I say and hear. So that is what true communication is, when we are really on all cylinders, when we really are clear and we have a meeting of the minds about what we are talking about. And I wanted to also point out the trust and accountability, trust and teamwork are now considered the #1 management concern. And a lot of that has to do with being virtual, because it takes more to gain trust or to develop trust when you don't see someone, when you don't see them in the hallway, or you don't notice the subtle body shift when something was said. And I think often we don't realize how much we rely on that. And I feel like that's why Zoom feels alienating. And it doesn't have to be if what's going on behind it is a good, solid communication channel and a good, solid communication content. So I have one more slide, and this is kind of not exactly related to communications, but I guess it is. But it's something I've learned in my studies these last several weeks, and I thought was helpful for me. They're always kind of hard to do, but for successful virtual meetings, you need to be very prepared. It can't be shuffling your papers after the thing begins, after your meeting begins. You need to be on time. In the past, you might be a little bit late to a meeting because you ran into somebody in the hall, or you were grabbing a cup of coffee, and that might be acceptable. But when you've got everybody sitting there waiting, looking at their screens for you, that doesn't put you in a good light. Make eye contact with the camera as much as possible. I know, and that makes it hard to read other people's expressions. And I would say it is a lot easier if there's just 1 or 2 people on your call. But like today, if we were all I was trying to gauge your body language, I would just be looking at you, not at my presentation. So you have to kind of make a conscious effort to do that, even if it feels unnatural. But we have found that when you are looking at your camera, when you're speaking to people, they feel closer to you. They feel more connected with you because they think you're looking at them. Pay attention to your background, to your setup, your lighting, the centering on the camera, your computer with your camera, that, there's not a lot of clutter and distraction. And you should sit close, but far enough away to show your hands. Now, that is not something I'm doing today, except I am lifting my hands. But it's kind of tricky to get all that set up right. But anyway, these are the guidelines that we've received. Adjust your communication style to the person you are speaking with. And I can't sort of say this enough, because people need to know that you're on the same wavelength. And the way you do that is to adapt, I don't want to say mimic, but reflect, mirror how they're speaking with you, so that you have to be adaptable, but you want to make sure that you're really connecting with that person. And lastly, be sure to smile, because if we're frowning, which is easy to do, even though it's not frowning at a person, it again leaves a negative impression.